Welcome to the Advanced 3D Slicer Tips and Tricks video. Today we'll be covering how to set up your network for printing over local area networks, activating all the custom settings within the DigiLab 3D Slicer, creating custom printing profiles, changing all these elements, how to save those printing profiles for future use, how to add a custom material profile, changing your supports and what to look for, and then finally going into a bunch of different special modes and experimental features. And to help me do that today is our software expert, Mike Crow. So with that, Mike, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm just really quickly going to connect to one of our printers. And Satish actually covered this in the previous video. We'll be posting that as well. Let's see.
So in order to connect your printer, you're typing in this IP address, right?
Yeah.
How did you find this IP address?
You can actually go into the printer and go into your settings and under the About screen. Okay, and you will know you're connected when it actually has the Dremel 3D45 or 3D40. It'll identify here. So we are now connected. So the biggest thing that you guys are going to have to do right now is activate the custom function. And to do that, you can actually go into your settings, configure settings visibility, and then check this box until there's a check mark in there. If there's a square box, you won't see everything. So it should have the check in there. And then the next step is you can go to your custom settings over here on the right side. And now I'm going to import a model and kind of go through some of the settings we have here. Okay, so this model here is just a random one I got off of Thingiverse. It's called the benching model, and this is used to test all different aspects of a print, from exterior walls to if you need supports or not. But what a lot of people actually don't know is there's this little icon down here. It's called View Mode. If you click on that and select Layers, when you actually prepare your model, you'll actually get to see what the printer is actually going to show. So it won't just be a solid object. You'll actually see the tool paths, the lines, and you'll see what I mean in a second once this finished rendering. So right now, if you guys see, this is actually what your printer is going to print. It'll turn out exactly like this. To make this a little bit easier to understand, on the left side where it says material color, if you go to line type, this actually helps show you. The red is the outside perimeter, and the yellow is basically the top and bottom layers. So this is basically, when you look at this, this will be everything you guys, when you print something, it'll turn out exactly like this. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we have our standard profiles here. I'm going to quickly show you how to kind of create your own custom profile. And one that I actually use a lot is a really low resolution profile. The reason I do that is to get a really quick print. I could cut print times by 30 or 40% sometimes. So the biggest thing you're going to change here is you would just change your layer height. So you can do this is our standard quality 0.32, and when you do that, your print times actually will be probably 60% quicker on the printer now. You'll lose some of the quality, but the print will still turn out just fine.
And if any of this doesn't make sense to you, I would definitely recommend that you check out our previous video on the basics of the slicer. Right.
So now, like, let's say what happens when we scale this up, say 150% now. now I know that this is actually going to need supports, and we may need to have kind of custom supports in here. So what you can do is just minimize all these little toolbars here and just go to your support section. And you want to enable your supports. And the nice thing about our slicer is if you have if you want to know anything about any of these, like support placement, if you just hold your mouse over the actual text, it'll give you a description of any of these, so it's really clear. So like this connect support zigzag, this actually connects your supports so they're a lot more stable. So when you're printing something that requires really high supports, it's not going to move around on the bed and cause a failed print. So we're creating this profile to be really fast. So one thing we can actually do is change this overhang angle. What that does is once it hits this 55 degrees, it's going to enable supports. So we want to print faster. So maybe this one we would change to something like 65%. And once this renders here, you'll see in this little arch area here that it's going to add supports only on the areas where it's 65% or more. Believe it or not, if you have a really big print, that also would help speed things up a lot more too. One of the other things is the density now. That just means in that area where the supports is, how much of that open area is going to be supports. This is only going to be 15%. A lot of times if you're doing a really intricate model, there might not be a lot of area. So when you bump up this to maybe 50%, it uses more material, but it makes sure that there's enough support in the areas you need to print and your model would turn out. So now these are all the supports that we just tuned that it created. And supports are always identified as blue. Let me go ahead and go through. One second here. Hold on, my mouse is being a little weird here. Okay, so let's say we don't want to change anything else on this profile. We just want to have those few settings we changed, but we want to reference this profile later. This is something that I do all the time, so I want to save this so I don't have to change this every time. What you can do is click Create Profile from Current Settings, and now that allows me to call this Mike. You can call it whatever you want. So it's my custom draft mode. So now anytime I import a model, I can always just select this one from the drop-down now. So it's always saved. Makes things a lot easier in the future. And you're not just tied into these four qualities here. You can kind of make your own profiles for your own objects. And, okay. So another thing is maybe you have some other material that Dremel doesn't make yet. Let's say you use ABS and you vent it outside, or you use a ventilation system, but you have ABS. So you can actually add a material here. You go to Manage Materials, and you can actually create a new material. And the nice thing about this, the more information you fill out, the more accurate your time estimations will be, the more accurate the cost estimations will be. So, oh, my background is not working. So, come on. So I'll just duplicate this nylon here. So, let's say I call this nylon B. This is a really special nylon that I have. That's maybe a really expensive one that has a specific use for it. I can go in here. I could set the name. I could set the actual cost, and it is going to be, come on, let's see, 100 euros. You could change the currency in our settings, but by default it's euros. So it's 100 euros, and it's only a 500 gram spool. The reason why you're putting this in is because it'll calculate everything correctly and your print times will be accurate. And now the settings here allow you to set these temperatures and the build plate and anything else you may need to tune per that manufacturer specification. So I'm using manufacturer C, and their settings are, let's say, 275, but their bed is only 54 degrees. You could still set that in here, and then now that's your new profile you can select. Nylon B. So that's selected now. So when I do this print, I have my new profile and I have my new material settings. So another thing is when you're printing some models that might require some weird supports, I'll show you. I created this file the other day. All this is a spool holder that clips on the side of the 3D40 or 3D45. So if you guys kind of want to look, it basically hangs off the side, but if you can see underneath here, it's not touching the build plate where the spool holders and the spatula holder come off the ground. So what we want to do is we want to tune this to only have just very minimal support, so it prints really quickly, but it also removes from the bed. So if you guys look right here, these red areas are identified as areas that would need support. So I'm just going to go back to our default setting, which is 55 degrees. And if you just do this as is, it'll slice no problem. But let's say you're doing a model that you don't want to print on top of another model. Let me show you that. So I'm printing, this is a test print, and maybe let's say you want supports, but you don't want the supports to actually print on top of the print, potentially ruining your print. You can actually go into your supports, and if you select touching build plate, it'll only add supports on the checkerboard area. Any area that is overhanging over the actual print, it will not add supports to. And that will actually give you much better prints depending on what the print is. I know our printer can print this pretty well without support, so I could just slice this. Actually, yeah, this is pretty quick. One second here. Okay, so we want to go back to our layer view to see this. And you can see the areas that it was saying it needed support. Right on this bottom here, it doesn't have the support because we turned touching build plate on. So only areas that would be touching the checkerboard pattern would have it. And we kind of went over the support density. If you're doing a really small area, we have a lot of our customers actually will print like small action figures. I do that sometimes too. These are really small areas where it may put only one line of support here. If you bump this up to 30 or 40%, it'll add a lot more support under here to make sure that it has enough to support these overhang areas. So that's really the basics of the support. All right. Another cool thing that you can actually do is you go into Preference, Configured Cura. This right here, you change your currency to dollars. We're in Chicago over here, so I'm going to use dollars. But this theme, I want dark theme. Now, what that does, it converts everything to a really dark grayscale type. So let me just restart Cura and I will show you guys. And this is only, once you change this one time, it's saved like that until you revert it back. But this is kind of nice, like if you're working late at night, you don't have a really bright background, and this is like the dark mode theme. I like this a lot. It makes everything a little bit better to view, I think. For me personally, I have horrible eyesight, so it works for me. So let me import a model, and I'll kind of go over some cool experimental features we have. So this is a solid object that normally you would print what's called vase, like a vase mode type. So I'll show you that. If you go ahead and expand your experimental features right here at the bottom, hollow out the object, and what that does, it'll take a completely solid object like this and only print the exterior walls and the top and bottom. So I'll show you guys here. And the really cool thing about that is you can actually turn off the top layer and kind of print this like a vase where it would hold water, and you could put water in here. I've done that a lot actually. Taking a second here. I don't have the fastest computer because I have all my software tools on here. Okay, so this little slider here lets you see basically each layer of the print. You can kind of scroll through here. So if you look, it is basically hollow on the inside now. We only have 2 walls, and the print time on this is around 3 hours, 41 minutes, which isn't bad. It would be much, much higher than that if you actually had this hollow turned off. It'd be doing a lot of infill. Another cool thing that we can do is turn on fuzzy skin. That kind of gives it like a exterior texture. So if it's a smooth object, it'll turn it into kind of like it'll look more like cloth, like fuzzy exterior, and you'll see that in a second here. And this does all this really without changing the dimensions too much. I mean, 0.3 millimeters is the most it would change on the whole print. So something like this, visually, you wouldn't be able to tell if you had 2 side by side. So kind of looks like it's all like kind of smashed and moved around, but that's by design for this feature. It gives you kind of like a textured look on there. And when it prints, you can get really cool effects depending on what resolution you print at and how big the object is, but that's another really cool feature we have. So let me do, let me import another one. I'll go back to the spool holder because it's, and all these arrange functions and rotate functions we did cover in our previous video that we'll still put up. But this next feature, which is very, very helpful, it gives you a really good visual. It makes the top layer of your prints look just as good as the bottom layer. It gives it a really smooth finish. If you enable ironing right over here, what that does is the last layer it does on the top, it prints that and it goes over the top again, kind of like how you're ironing. So it uses the nozzle to basically smash this really smoothly in a really nice pattern. So you really don't have these lines. You kind of see here, there's really thin lines in there. It does a really small movement between here, and then the top and the bottom basically look like it's completely merged. There's no walls you see. Everything looks really nice, and that'll work on even rounded objects. It doesn't matter. And as you see again, there's for an object like this, and it'll break away a nice actual part. And let's see. So let's say you're printing something in nylon and you're still noticing it's warping. This doesn't have a lot of surface area to stick to the build plate, This draft shield, what that does is that'll put a perimeter around the print. So as you print, there's no air that is really interfering with the object and cooling it too fast or too slow and causing warping. If you shrink this down, it's a little too big. There. So you'll see there'll be a single wall that actually goes around here. So this blue area, basically, as you print, it shields the object from any kind of air that can interfere with it, from warping or delaminating from the build plate. Okay. So let's pull in one more object. Go back to this one, this spaghetti infill. This one is basically like a bowl of spaghetti. It just does random infill. This is useful if you have some objects that just have irregular shapes, and it does the infill a little weird in some areas because maybe the model shrinks in the center or tapers back off to the left or right. This is kind of cool. This doesn't really change the exterior of the print. It just allows the interior to be to have that infill to hold everything together too. And the more complex the model, the longer it takes to slice in here, but let's go ahead and it kind of stacks it. If you see, it looks a lot different than before. It's thick supports, and depending on the object, it'll actually arrange differently for certain areas. But this is pretty uniform all the way up and down. So let's say you want to actually make a negative mold of this and let's say cast it. You can actually do that. You can go into special molds, which is right above experimental. All you have to do is check this mold option right here. All these settings are preset. You don't have to do anything in here, and hit prepare on that. Now what that does is it creates a mold around the actual object itself. So if you're going to cast something like, say, wax or candles or silicone, you can do that. I've done this. I've casted stuff for motorcycles, flexible, like badges for cars. You can do all that. And this one will take a little longer to print because you're adding a lot more print area, but it makes sure that everything is solid. So you can cast that in, I've done concrete, and it doesn't cause the object to deform. So this will take a second just to render here. One more second. Almost there. This one's a lot more complex because it has to take geometries and create exterior walls of this, but if you're into casting and making molds and stuff like that, this one saves you so much time in the design phase. You just design what you want in your CAD software, Tinkercad, SolidWorks, Creo, and this creates a negative mold of that. So basically, this inside area is the mold, and you might be wondering, hey, there's no top and bottom layer, but usually when you cast the mold, you would put this in like, say, sand, or you put like putty around here, but you can just pour your material, concrete, clear acrylic, epoxy, all that can be poured in here, and it's the same exact dimensions as the print was. All right. right. And actually one more cool thing I could show you is going back to our spool holder. So one other thing is you can actually have a different types of support in here too. So turn this on so you can see the model. Like I said, these red areas, you want different supports. Maybe you can change the patterns for the floor to give you, show you that. Maybe it's not sticking to the bed well, or maybe you need more surface area, or the area is really small. You can change how that prints to get you the better first layer. So that feature I changed right here was basically this first layer. It's kind of hard to see right here. And you could use what's called towers, which is, let's say you're printing an action figure and he has an axe or a sword in that really small area. If you enable towers, it'll print more of a square or conical support in that area. So it still will support that area, but you don't have to worry about having a huge support section just to stick to there. Yeah, that is basically all the quick features I can cover today. I mean, there's 314 features. I tried to pick the coolest ones so far. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. So just to wrap up and go over everything that we've covered today, we've shown you how to add a printer, set up a printer on the network, how to activate all your custom settings, how to create your custom printing profiles, and then save them for later use, how to add a custom material profile, how to tune supports and what to look for, and finally those, I think, 7 or 8 special modes that allow you to do some very unique things with the DigiLab 3D Slicer.